often asked down here in the Ideal Bureau, how do you ruin ideas? Well, I'll tell you. They're usually ruined when they're locked in crude little dialectics. History of philosophy is full of them. Those of you who know anything will know that Plato is juxtaposed against Aristotle. Kant is juxtaposed against anybody. Absolutely anybody. He'll oppose anybody. And Nietzsche doesn't like the lot. And you've got endless little crude dialectics. Now, these dialectics are meant to tell you something about the way you think or characterise the dilemma in your modern world. But they don't do anything of the sort. They're useless. Do you know what they're really useful for? Teaching. So much of philosophy's rhythm is set by what is easy to teach. I know, I've done it myself. But this, I think, is dangerous. Let me give you an example of what I think is the most dangerous, the most difficult of all these crude little dilemmas, all these crude little dialectics. The one that is making your world, even if you don't know it. That dialectic is the one I've missed out. Those of you who've done any history of Western thought might have realised the one I've missed out. It's Locke versus Hobbes. Both 17th century thinkers. On the one hand, you get the godfather of the American Constitution, the hero of liberty, Locke. The man who thought that you want as little government as possible, no taxation, and having slaves is okay. And on the other, you get the epitome of strong government. The guy who thought that everything will be all right if we have a nice generalissimo with a moustache in charge. Hobbes. But the trouble is with this dialectic, you see, the history of philosophy is such that we end up teaching philosophy to an awful lot of people. Again, I know I've done it myself. To all kinds of people who are never going to go beyond, but are going to end up teaching and thinking about international relations or politics. They know their Hobbes and their Locke. And isn't Hobbes versus Locke the kind of Mancheistic divide we've offered the post-imperial world? So when we've pulled back from powers, we've tried to make them into nice little Lockean societies, bastions of democracy and liberty. And when it hasn't worked, what have we done? Nice generalissimo in charge, man with a moustache. Hobbes versus Locke. There is no choice. I might mention all the recent ones. Hurrah. We went in with Lockean dreams and tried to find a nice Hobbes. Arab Spring, same thing is happening. It is a dangerous division because it's so simple. Locke was never very good at other people's cultures, and Hobbes was rather unique to English history. But with my philosopher's hat on, and that means I'm pedantic, I mind for another reason too. You see, it gets both philosophers wrong. You will have all noticed I'm not a Locke fan. You have noticed that, yeah? I don't like him. He's a quisling for slavery. Anyway, even he has got wrong by this. But Hobbes, oh, that's another matter. You see, Hobbes, at his heart, has a problem you better remember. What is it? It's simply this. It is true Hobbes does like strong government, but why? Tell you why. Because he says, and remember he's a contemporary of Milton, he says it at the beginning of Leviathan, even if you had a company of angels, divine under heaven, led by Lucifer, when he was bright, within 1,000 years, you'd have a state of war, unless you had a government. But why? Why? It's not because he doesn't believe in compassion, he does. He explicitly mentions it under his emotions. It's not because he doesn't believe in reason, he does. But he thinks reason is as good as the assumptions you give it. And it's certainly not because he doesn't believe in law, because he will talk about natural law and the natural law of compassion. No. The real reason why life in the state of nature is a state of war and nasty, brutish and short is very simple. I'm not you. And between us, there is a chasm. A chasm that remains unbridgeable. There's nothing we can do about it. And between that chasm that we might ignore at our peril, all kinds of differences lie. And those differences, like Hobbes will say, will gradually build up, build a head of steam, until in the end they break into the world as war. And that is the point of government. The point of government is to burn into our minds the same assumptions. You see, key to this argument is reason. If only we can agree where we start, we've got a chance to know where we're going to end up. So the point, Hobbes says, of government is to burn by any means possible. If it takes violence, that's what it takes. We don't do it by violence, we do it by mass education in this country. And when I'm teaching, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm burning assumptions into people's heads. I really mean that. I really am. And I'm doing my Hobbesian thing. I'm ensuring that everybody agrees. But Hobbes fears democracy for another reason. A reason actually most of us understand rather well. That's because he'll say, if you live in a complicated society, then there is a vestige interest on any one of the parties in that society to actually question the assumptions. And the problem is, those assumptions are based on nothing. You question them, the entire thing can start to collapse. It can become unscrewed. Think about moments, a decade or more ago, the fuel protesters. Wasn't that a moment it felt scary? Or another one, because it explains something else from my mind. Isn't one of the big things about our society that we're united by our paranoia? I mean, for instance, if you're on the left, you automatically are suspicious of big corporations. It's just knee-jerk. You just believe it on Facebook and you've signed the petitions, and that's that. But if you're on the right, you fear the unions or whatever. Why? Isn't what we're a bit scared of the fact that the other side are somehow questioning the assumptions we live by? And actually, doesn't that paranoia keep us behaving ourselves, keeping us watching them, and keep the whole lot together? Possibly. But the real threat to a Hobbesian universe, the real threat that we actually have to take seriously, I think, even if we reject Hobbes. And remember, Hobbes is the man who's lived through something. He's lived through the collapse of the British state. In 1640, at the beginning of the Long Parliament, Britain was very well ordered, very prosperous. 3 years later, a civil war. He really knows what he's talking about. And where would he be most worried? Tell you what, international law. Why? Hobbes is very clear. Nation states relate to other nation states in a state of war. Doesn't mean they can't fight, doesn't mean they don't have law. But it does mean all the assumptions are constantly thrown up and questioned, and there won't be any enduring agreement. What isn't the problem of our society that so many points nations are meeting, trying to find agreement? I mean, I'll give you three. The first would have occurred to you all, is the internet. The internet challenges Hobbes at a very deep level. And if you don't take that seriously, do you know what will happen? People will try to make you so terrified of using the internet, going online, of maintaining your own little identity, that you'll want their state. That you'll want some sort of meta-state, some meta-police force to enforce some order in a state of nature. The second one, I think I would say, is international law. International law is a problem for Hobbes. Not because we can't agree. Of course we can. We're all compassionate. You can say, of course you can in a state of nature. The problem is, you can't enforce it. Or any way to enforce it undermines the state in which it's enforced. Think about the Tory party and the EU. It's the obvious example. They have to suspect the EU, and maybe the EU do undermine things. I can say that while still liking the EU, because actually they're questioning, by their definition, some of the assumptions by which we run our society. But neither of those two are the most dangerous. The most dangerous is the obvious one. What is it that exists between nations? That's traded all the time. Money. The point is that in any international banking system, where is the value coming from? Well, it won't come from the state of nature. The state of nature, which will be spinning around, will question any value. The value comes from a state. If you sacrifice then yourself to a banking system, Hobbes will say you'll undermine the value of money. I used to teach that 10 years ago. People used to wonder what on earth I was on. I mean it. The point is, the value of money for Hobbes comes from the state. And if you forget that, you're liable to undermine the way you run what you are. You see, Hobbes is a philosopher who matters. And locking him in a dialectic makes him feel easy